In this video, we take a look at bias binding. Stay with me and I'll show you how. There are two kinds of bias binding, single fold and double fold. Single fold is where the edges are folded in once towards the centre, and double fold is where the edges are folded in and then it is folded over again. Single fold is good for hems and facing, and the double fold is good for encasing the raw edges of necklines. You can buy bias tape ready-made, but I'm going to show you how to make it. So let's get started. Here we have a rectangle of fabric, and we're going to cut out our strips on the bias. Basically what that means is we're going to cut diagonally. On a woven fabric, there's the straight grain which goes lengthwise, the cross grain which goes widthwise, and diagonally in either direction is the bias. If we were to pull the fabric either lengthwise or widthwise, see there's very little give. Yet if we pull diagonally on the bias, you'll notice that there is some stretch to it, which is great for manipulating around curves. So let's cut out our strips. I'm going to demonstrate the continuous cut method, which is where we make one long bias strip with two easy seams. We need to start by cutting our diagonal line at 45 degrees. To find 45 degrees, fold up one corner so that the two edges are in line. And on the other side we make a mark where the corner turns up at the edge. And we draw a line from that mark to the opposite corner. And we cut out along this line. Now we take this corner we've just cut off and we move it over to the other side so that we have two straight edges together. So our fabric should now look like a parallelogram. Next we place the right sides together and we stitch along this line with a seam allowance of about 1/4 of an inch. We then press the seam open. Now our two pieces of fabric are stitched together. It's time to start cutting our bias strips. When deciding how wide to make our strip, we first decide whether we want single or double fold. For single fold, we take the measurement of how wide we want our tape to be and double it. This is to account for the edges being turned over. This bias tape is 1 inch wide, so I cut a strip of 2 inches wide, and it's pressed in 1/2 inch on each side. For the double fold bias tape, we quadruple our measurement to account for it being folded over twice. This bias tape is 1/2 inch. The original strip was 2 inches, folded in 1/2 inch towards the centre, and then folded again. So starting from the edge and marking along, we mark out a series of lines with a width of 2 inches. At the final edge there will be a thin strip that's too small to use. We simply trim that off. To make this easy, I'm going to mark out my seam allowance on both sides. I'll be using a seam allowance of 1/4 of an inch. I mark this out top and bottom. We're going to fold the fabric widthwise with right sides together, and we're going to offset the first strip. So the bottom of the first strip, we're going to line up with the top of the second strip. So eventually we will cut this all out in one long spiral. To pin this in place, come through the bottom front to back, coming through that point where the edge of the strip meets the seam line, and I line that up with the point on the other side. And the very edge of the strip should just meet the intersection between the diagonal line and the seam line. We work along the edge, pinning our edges together. And if we've done this right, when we reach the end, we should have one strip left over and the corners should match up. Now we're going to take our slightly twisted tube over to the sewing machine And we're going to stitch along this edge. And once our tube is stitched together, we press the seam open. And now we can turn our tube right side out. And starting at one end, we can follow our chalk line and cut out our one long strip. We cut away excess seam allowance and then head to the ironing board where we can press and fold our tape. Now there are a few methods of folding the tape. You can buy gadgets to actually fold the tape for you. I generally prefer doing it by eye. Another way is to mark a line down the centre point and fold each edge in towards that centre line. Press one side at a time to get started. Press and hold the iron for a few seconds. Try not to drag the iron, as this can distort the fabric. Because this is cut on the bias, the fabric is more stretchy and more easily distorted. So press and hold for about 8 to 10 seconds. Fold the next part of the tape and press and hold. Keep working along the length of the tape, pressing down and holding the iron for 8 to 10 seconds. And there we've made our single fold bias tape. And to make double fold bias tape, we simply fold the tape in half, pressing with the iron. And there we've made our double fold bias tape. First we'll take a look at the single fold bias tape. We open up one side of the bias tape and we place it on top of our piece with the right sides together. Place some pins to hold it in place. You can pin it all the way along, or you can just use 2 or 3 pins to get started. We then stitch these together, staying close to the fold, staying within the fold closer to the edge. Try not to go over, as that will affect being able to fold it over. I use the centre notch of my presser foot as a guide, keeping that in line with the crease. If you find it hard to see the crease, you can always mark it. Once we've stitched all the way along, we cut off the remaining tape. And now we fold the tape over towards the wrong side and press it down. We want this to sit flat with no puckering on the front, so we need to manipulate the tape as we're pressing it down. You might want to stretch the tape a little bit to make it fit. And as we're working along, we pin the tape down. This phase will take a lot of pins and a lot of patience. But when we've got everything pinned in place, we top stitch the tape down, staying close to the inside edge. Go slowly, making sure there's no puckering on the fabric underneath. And when our tape is stitched down, we give our piece a final hot steam press to make sure that it all lies flat and even. For a convex curve, you might find it useful to stretch the tape slightly as we work around stitching it in place. Again, stitching close to the crease, sticking to the side with the raw edge. We clip the curve within the seam allowance. We turn the tape over towards the wrong side and press it down. Again, pinning the tape down as we go. And here we have the opposite issue to the concave curve, where the inner part of the tape felt tight. Now there will be slight bunching. We want to try and work that out as much as possible, and the more pins we use to keep it down, the better. And as we top stitch down the edge of the tape, we can hold the tape down with a pin to make it lay as flat as possible and reduce bunching. We give our piece a final hot steam press That was the single fold bias tape. Let's look at the double fold. When working with the double fold bias tape, the same method applies, stitching just inside of the crease. The only difference, instead of holding both right sides together, we stitch the right side of the tape onto the wrong side of the fabric. And as we're folding it over the edge, we top stitch it down on the right side of the fabric. This way we can see that we're getting a neat finish. Now we have our tape stitched on. We turn our work to the right side, folding the tape over with the centre crease at the top and the inner fold folded underneath. We press it down, manipulating it to sit nice and flat, and we top stitch the tape down close to the inner edge. When our seams are done, we give them a hot steam press so that all the fabric lies flat. With a convex seam, there's no need to clip the edges with the double fold tape because it simply sits on top. Press it down so that it sits neat and flat, and top stitch it down close to the inner edge. Once again we finish it off with a hot steam press. And that's how to use the double fold bias tape. If the end of the tape is going to be encased in the seam, we just cut it flush with the rest of the fabric. But sometimes we'll be using it in a full loop like on a hem, so I'll show you how to finish the ends of the tape. We use this method for single fold and double fold bias tape. I'm just going to do this demonstration using the single fold tape. I have a sample piece here, but just imagine we have a full circle hem and we want to finish it off. We begin stitching the tape down, remembering to backstitch, but leaving about 3 to 5 inches at the beginning, and we can work with this at the end. And we stitch all the way around the seam until we come close to the end, leaving a gap of about 3 to 5 inches. We take one end of the tape and open it up fully. We then fold it up away from the raw edge. So we have the right side facing up with a 45-degree angle. We take the other end of the tape and open it up fully, lining up the raw edges and laying it over the side we just folded up. We pinch those two pieces together and pin them together so that they don't shift about. And we're going to stitch a diagonal line from one corner to the other. We mark a line from corner to corner so we know exactly where to stitch. So we head to the sewing machine and stitch along this diagonal line. Now we've stitched our diagonal line, we cut off all the excess fabric, leaving a seam allowance of about 1/4 of an inch. I forgot to switch the camera on to show you this part, but just trim 1/4 of an inch away from the line. Now we've made a continuous loop of bias tape with a diagonal seam, which will reduce bulk when we fold it over. So first we press this new seam open, and where we've pressed it open, we'll probably want to repress the fold. We then stitch down those last few inches of bias tape, closing the gap. We turn the tape over and press it, and top stitch it down. Once again we finish it off with a hot steam press, and that's how to finish off your ends. And that's how to use bias binding.